So there's a big chill that they're laying on. And I think these episodes of terrorism actually show the Anglo-American elite is now more than a little hysterical, that the world situation is tending to escape from their control, that things are getting out of hand, and they respond in these tried and true methods of, well, you know, let's give them a whiff of terrorism, right? Nothing huge, but, you know, substantial, which is just what we've seen, right? About 20 people killed in France and some more across Europe.
I'm Bonnie Faulkner. Today on Guns and Butter, Webster Tarpley. Today's show, Russia, Belarus, France, Greece. The world rebels against Wall Street rule. Webster Tarpley is an economic historian, author, and lecturer. He is author of Against Oligarchy, Surviving the Cataclysm, a study of the world financial crisis, 9/11 synthetic terror made in the USA, Obama, the unauthorized biography, and co-author of George Bush, the unauthorized biography. He is a leader and activist with the United Front Against Austerity. On today's program, we discuss the terrorist attacks in Paris, the global economic upheaval and currency wars, the Greek elections, and activist Reverend Edward Pinkney's legal prosecution. Webster Tarpley, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you again, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Webster. 12 people were killed in Paris in a military-style attack on Charlie Hebdo, a newspaper known for running cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. According to McClatchy News Service, quote, the terror attack wasn't a total surprise. Europe, France, and even the newspaper have been preparing for such an attack for months. End quote. According to the New York Times, the militants had been known to the police for years and had been closely monitored by the intelligence services. End quote. Where would you start in trying to understand these terrorist attacks?
Well, I would, in effect, start with the question of alliance discipline. In other words, geopolitical terrorism. And this is my own background, I guess, to a pretty large extent. It's something like this. This really serious terrorism in Western Europe occurs, or has occurred historically, when various countries decide that they're not happy with the Anglo-American yoke. They don't want to be dominated by Washington, London, New York. They want to assert some kind of independence or some kind of national project. They don't want to simply accept orders. And this is what I wrote about starting in 1978. The Aldo Moro kidnapping was that Moro wanted to break out of the NATO lockstep. He wanted to bring the Communist Party into the government, strong national government, and open up all kinds of trade deals with the Arab countries, the Middle East, oil for development, and things like this. And therefore he was killed. And the obvious implication is that this was done by Western, U.S., British intelligence agencies. Similarly, General de Gaulle of France, of course, was the greatest of all rebels inside NATO. He even kicked NATO out of France in 1966, right? The headquarters used to be near Paris, Versailles, I think. Kicked them out. And what happened to him? There were 30 plus, more than 30 assassination attempts against General de Gaulle, and of course, CIA working through Algerian disgruntled French settlers and ultra-colonialists and things like this are key. We've also had it more recently, right? If you remember, in 2011, Norway was part of the bombing of Libya. And at a certain point, the Social Democratic government of Norway said, we're tired of this, we're dropping out. And when the Netherlands government, the Dutch, saw it, they said, actually, maybe we'll drop out too. And then what do you get? Breivik, the lunatic, right, who starts shooting at the children of the elite of this country. At that summer camp. So I think that what we're dealing with now is something similar. Now, here are the relevant points. It has nothing to do with Charlie Hebdo, has nothing to do with cartoons, has nothing to do with free speech. Here's what it has to do with. The president of France, Hollande, is, of course, a political desperado, right? His popularity is, below Jimmy Carter or below George W. Bush, right? It's about 20%. He's desperate. He would like to run again for a second term, but he's got to immediately reverse his field. And I think the idea is that over this Christmas vacation, he went through a kind of a policy shift, right? A renversement, a complete reversal of what he'd been doing so far. And he began announcing this on the 5th of January, on the Monday before the Charlie Hebdo terrorism on Wednesday, right? So we're talking about the 5th to the 7th. So on the 5th, Francois Hollande, the French president, gets on this main radio station in the country, and he says that he has been talking to Putin, and that he has now been convinced by Putin that Putin does not wish to annex eastern Ukraine. He says, Putin told me that, and I believe him. All Putin wants, says Hollande, is to remain influential. What he wants is for Ukraine not to become a part of NATO. Reasonable enough, right? Let it remain neutral, which it had been for quite a while. And then the big one. Hollande says, quote, I think the sanctions must stop now. They must be lifted if there is progress. Again, I think the sanctions must stop now. That is a direct challenge to the lockstep, the sanctions imposed by Washington and London, right? The anti-Russian economic sanctions, which these characters in the Anglo-American camp now believe they think they can bring Russia to their knees through a combination of the Saudi pumping policy, right? Prince Bandar's pump, baby pump, to flood the market with oil, and the sanctions. This is now, you got these Anglo-American think tanks salivating that they can now break up Russia, topple Putin, have a color revolution. But wait, along comes the French president, and he says, I think the sanctions must stop now. That's a direct rebellion. That is going to lead to the collapse of the sanctions regime as a whole, right? It's going to be gone. And for Hollande, the implication is there are these two small aircraft carriers, right? Amphibious assault ships, very capable ships, the Mistral class. There are two of them. The Russians have bought them. The French would like to deliver them. If they want to be taken seriously as arms suppliers, they have to. Many thousands of jobs depend on this. Everybody knows that the U.S. and the British have told Hollande, don't you dare deliver those ships. And Hollande is practically here saying that he's going to deliver them. And there's more. There was going to be a conference on the 15th of January, and this was going to be in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, right, way out in Central Asia. And this was going to be attended by Putin of Russia, by Poroshenko of Ukraine, in other words, the Ukraine fascist leader. I always call him Pornoshenko, helps to remember who he is, plus Merkel of Germany, plus Hollande. And with Hollande on the line that we hear on this interview, this would have been really rough for Merkel to hold up the entire anti-Russian position. But what we see now, jumping ahead of our argument, that conference never occurred. And the fact that that conference never occurred, it was not going to occur. This was announced by Merkel on the famous Sunday, right, a week ago yesterday, when we had the big unity march, right, the big love fest, the big kumbaya in the streets of Paris. And, of course, the U.S. didn't send anybody. But right after that, or during that same day, Merkel gave a little interview saying, by the way, the Astana conference is not going to happen. So a great opportunity to have Europe solve its own problem was swept away. And now there are two more. The U.S. and the British want France to invade Libya. They want to do that. They want to get every oil well in Libya pumping. That's part of the pump, baby, pump, to hit the Russians and the Iranians and the Venezuelans and everybody else. But Hollande said in the interview, I'm not going to invade Libya. That's no purpose for France. France will not intervene in Libya. The international community should do that, he says. And then finally on Greece. There's going to be an election in Greece on the 25th of January. And every indication is that the Syriza party of Alexis Tsipras, the left union, with an excellent economic program, anti-Wall Street, anti-austerity, anti-City of London, anti-debt, extremely good, they're going to win. They're going to become the government. And you're going to have the first anti-austerity government in Europe in decades, and anti-banker, anti-financier, and this is going to be a watershed really for the entire world, because Alexis Tsipras from now on will be going to those European Union meetings in Brussels, and actually even the NATO meetings he will go, because Greece is a NATO country. So the strategy of the bankers concerning Greece was hysteria and fear, right? You had Merkel come out. You had the Greek prime minister, the austerity ghoul, Samaras, come out and say, if you vote for Syriza, it's the end of the world. Chaos, the abyss, delirium. You're going to leave the euro. Well, the Syriza program is explicitly stay in the euro. And anybody with any brains can see that the best policy, the correct policy, is stay in the euro and fight to change the policy of the European Central Bank. Don't leave the euro. The only people who are saying that Syriza wants to leave the euro are British speculators, Wall Street speculators, people who would like to bust up the euro and feast on the carcass. But that is not what the Syriza party wants. Anybody who says that Syriza is anti-euro is simply lying. Anyway, they ask Hollande in this interview, what do you think about that? And he says, well, he's very relaxed. He says, the Greeks have to vote for whoever they want, and we want them to keep up their international obligations, but I'm really not so worried about that. That was also another huge freakout then behind the scenes by Merkel and others saying, how dare you? You're supposed to be talking fear, and you're doing the opposite. How dare you? And indeed, in the wake of all this, the Syriza party has moved ahead of the New Democracy, the right-wingers, by about 5 percentage points, and that is big, and that a lot of that lead came after these events. So what we have in this interview, and again, it's France Inter on the 5th of January, is that Hollande is rebelling against NATO on these key points, right? He's saying, I'm against the sanctions, I want to cooperate with Putin, I'm not going to invade Libya, I'm not freaking out about Greece. And we can add in, certainly, that the French parliament had said that they want to recognize the Palestinian state. That's an important atmospheric. But let me just point out, this is not about Israel. This is about the cohesion and discipline of the U.S. empire. In other words, rebellions like this on a broad array of policy issues, this is what elicits terrorism. Now, if you look at Charlie Hebdo, this is a scurrilous publication, which I've laughed at over the years. It's funny. But if you look at those people, it started off as anti-de Gaulle. The people who founded it were Vichy. They were Vichy, coming from the Pétain-Vichy fascist regime, in effect. And the people who are in there these days, or were in there, the editor, the guy who was the editor, a guy called Philippe Val, V-A-L, had gone on to become the head of France Inter. In other words, it's like becoming the president of CBS or NBC network, right? So this is not an anti-establishment group. And another one is this guy Sharb, one of the cartoonists who was killed. Sharb's wife was a minister in the government of Sarkozy. She was like the youth sports minister or some, junior minister, but still right-wing member of the cabinet, right, of the sub-cabinet of France. So the idea with these killings was to say, French elite, watch out. We can get you anywhere. And we have to remember the story of France is that until recently, France was the classic maverick of the Western Alliance, right? France could say no. No to London, no to New York, no to Washington. And France could also be exceptional, right? L'exception française. What is that? The French exception is that they're independent. They're fiercely independent. They don't take orders. And I think the Anglo-Americans feared, and still fear, that these moves by Hollande indicate that the French administration, the French bureaucracy, right, this group of Cartesian officials, right, had gotten fed up with the sanctions and wanted to gravitate much more to a pro-Russian line that would allow them to restart the French economy and perhaps win the election. And certainly for Hollande, winning the election would be a big deal. So I think that's pretty much it. It's not about cartoons. It's not about Muhammad, not about any of this other stuff.
I'm speaking with economic historian and author Webster Tarpley. Today's show, Russia, Belarus, France, Greece. The world rebels against Wall Street rule. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Well, Hollande was allying himself with French economic interests instead of Washington's foreign policy. Could the Paris attacks constitute an attack on all of Europe, not just France? That is, the subjugation of all of Europe?
Well, you'd have to see the politics of these individual situations. It's interesting that after the French attacks, first of all, we have to assume that there are Atlanticist pro-CIA MI6 networks in the French police, right? In other words, these people who did it, Koulibaly and the two brothers, the Kouachi brothers. These are the usual suspects, right? If you remember Claude Rains in the Casablanca movie, round up the usual suspects. These people were the well-known political suspects, right, for political terrorism. And the Kouachi brothers, one of them had been in jail for a year and a half. Police knew exactly who he was. And then all of them, the two Kouachis and Koulibaly, had been rounded up for a plot to break out of jail this Algerian terrorist, Belkacem, of the GIA, Groupe Islamique Armée. That guy had blown up some cars on the Paris subway in 1995. So these people were well known. They were on the U.S. no-fly list. Koulibaly had been training, in the Middle East at various places. One of the Kouachis had gone to Yemen, and he had come under the wing of Awlaki, Anwar Awlaki, the CIA lackey. Even somebody as confused as Jeremy Scahill mentioned in one of his TV interviews about Yemen that he thought Awlaki might well be a U.S. double agent. Well, hallelujah. He's got it written all over him, right? He's Awlaki, the CIA lackey, CIA double agent. So if you're recruited by him, then you're likely to be a U.S. double agent also. So that would apply to one of these Kouachi brothers. Now, this whole agitation, this whole theater has spread to Belgium, and then, of course, to Greece. One of the other features of this thing is to kill the political atmosphere in Europe, right? When Syriza wins the election, which I think they are now destined to do, and especially if they can form a government, right? They might not have quite enough to form the government, and they're going to have to think about coalitions and other problems. But if they can succeed in solving that, I think you might have a mass upsurge in Europe. In other words, the labor movement, right? The people that have been downtrodden, crushed, humiliated, stripped, ripped off, flayed alive for these many decades might say, okay, basta, right? It's enough. We're going to rise up. And I think what you're seeing is some preventive chilling by NATO intelligence to say, let's bash these people down. And we have the same thing here in the U.S., right? You notice last week, in 2 days, we had two psychotic patsies from Ohio coming forward and calling either the wife of their intended victim or the police, allegedly, and saying that they were going to attack the Republicans of the House of Representatives or Speaker Boehner. And one of these was the bartender at his country club. Mike, the bartender, turns out to be a psychotic patsy and calls Boehner's wife and says, I'm coming for you. Doesn't seem to make much sense, does it? And then the other guy is this long-haired fellow from Cincinnati, and he, of course, has been carefully groomed by an FBI agent, right? An entrapment agent. So what's the result there, right? It means if you go out and demonstrate against the Republicans of the House, right? For example, the Republicans of the House have already passed something. I think the first thing they did to cut the Social Security disability benefit by at least 20%. They've done this. And suppose you're on Social Security disability, or you have a relative who is. You're going to be plenty mad, but then they can come forward and say, oh, you're following in the footsteps of these two psychotic patsies. Are you a terrorist too? I mean, God, we all lived through this, right, under the 9/11 era. Right? You couldn't come out and say, down with Bush, because then you were getting too close to Osama bin Laden or somebody like this. You get the idea? So there's a big chill that they're laying on. And I think these episodes of terrorism actually show the Anglo-American elite is now more than a little hysterical, that the world situation is tending to escape from their control, that things are getting out of hand, and they respond in these tried and true methods of, well, you know, let's give them a whiff of terrorism, right? Nothing huge, but, you know, substantial, which is just what we've seen, right? About 20 people killed in France and some more across Europe. And once again, I can't stress it enough. It had nothing to do with cartoons, nothing to do with free speech. There is no free speech in France, right? There's all kinds of stuff you're not allowed to say, right? You're not allowed to say certain things about the Second World War. You're not allowed to say certain things about Armenians. You're not allowed to do a million different things, right? They ban parties. They do all that stuff. You can't watch press TV. So this complete festival of hypocrisy that they've got going. Thierry Meyssan, Frenchman, who obviously follows this stuff closely, he would add another thing, that when you have maybe 10% of the French population who are Muslims, what might come out of this is a medium to long-term effort to weaken France by provoking a civil war. In other words, if you can somehow drive this wedge between the Muslim and non-Muslim parts of France, then maybe you can certainly cripple the country with pervasive tensions, and maybe you can get something going in the way of fighting. So I would urge everybody to back off on all these things. I'd forget about the cartoons, forget about free speech. That's not the issue. Nobody represents free speech to a pretty large extent. It's something like this. This really serious terrorism in Western Europe occurs, or has occurred historically, when various countries decide that they're not happy with the Anglo-American yoke. They don't want to be dominated by Washington, London, New York. They want to assert some kind of independence or some kind of national project. They don't want to simply accept orders. And this is what I wrote about starting in 1978. The Aldo Moro kidnapping was that Moro wanted to break out of the NATO lockstep. He wanted to bring the Communist Party into the government, strong national government, and open up all kinds of trade deals with the Arab countries, the Middle East, oil for development.
A newspaper known for running cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. According to McClatchy News Service, quote, the terror attack wasn't a total surprise. Europe, France, and even the newspaper have been preparing for such an attack for months. End quote. According to the New York Times, the militants had been known to the police for years and had been closely monitored by the intelligence services, end quote. Where would you start in trying to understand these terrorist attacks?
Well, I would, in effect, start with the question of alliance discipline. In other words, geopolitical terrorism. And this is my own background, I guess, and things like this. And therefore, he was killed. And the obvious implication is that this was done by Western, U.S., British intelligence agencies. Similarly, General de Gaulle of France, of course, was the greatest of all rebels inside NATO. He even kicked NATO out of France in 1966, right? The headquarters used to be near Paris, Versailles, I think. Kicked them out. And what happened to him? There were 30 plus, more than 30 assassination attempts against General de Gaulle, and of course, CIA working through Algerian disgruntled French settlers and ultra-colonialists and things like this are key. We've also had it more recently, right? If you remember, so there's a big chill that they're laying on, and I think these episodes of terrorism actually show the Anglo-American elite is now more than a little hysterical, that the world situation is tending to escape from their control, that things are getting out of hand, and they respond in these tried and true methods of, well, let's give them a whiff of terrorism, right? Nothing huge, but, substantial, which is just what we've seen, right? About 20 people killed in France and some more across Europe.
I'm Bonnie Faulkner. Today on Guns and Butter, Webster Tarpley. Today's show, Russia, Belarus, France, Greece. The world rebels against Wall Street rule. Webster Tarpley is an economic historian, author, and lecturer. He is author of Against Oligarchy, Surviving the Cataclysm, a study of the world financial crisis, 9/11 synthetic terror made in the USA, Obama, the unauthorized biography, and co-author of George Bush, the unauthorized biography. He is a leader and activist with the United Front Against Austerity. On today's program, we discuss the terrorist attacks in Paris, the global economic upheaval and currency wars, the Greek elections, and activist Reverend Edward Pinkney's legal prosecution. Webster Tarpley, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you again, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Webster. 12 people were killed in Paris in a military-style attack on Charlie Hebdo.